The Smithsonian Faculty Fellowship Program represents a rewarding academic professional development opportunity for faculty at Montgomery College. The fellowships are a product of a unique collaboration between Montgomery College and Smithsonian Center for Education and Museum Studies. It's the first of its kind between the Smithsonian Institution and a community college.
Elissa Abod earned a BA in psychology from the Pennsylvania State University, an MA in industrial psychology from Fairleigh Dickinson University, and a PhD in industrial organizational psychology from George Mason University. As an IO psychologist, Elissa has worked on large-scale workforce development projects for agencies such as the FBI, the FAA, and the Army Research Institute. Currently, she teaches general psychology at Montgomery College. Her online teaching experience includes undergraduate-level courses at Argosy University and doctoral-level courses in IO psychology at the University of the Rockies. In her spare time, she maintains an active lifestyle to keep up with her two teenage boys.
Hi. I work here at the Rockville campus. I was very excited about hearing about the 2012 theme because it relates and connects to psychology in so many ways, and I felt it was a great opportunity to help extend my students' thinking and applying concepts in psychology to the real world and to themselves. So basically I'm going to give you a general overview of how we progress through the course and help prepare them for the museum experience. The museum that I selected was at the National Portrait Gallery. It was called Portraiture Now, Asian American Portraits of Encounter, and I'll hand this around when we get to that section. So basically my goals for the my goals for myself and my students, I wanted them to critically examine the development of identity from actually a variety of psychological perspectives. We have a wide variety of perspectives in psychology that focus on how we develop over time in terms of personality and identity. So I wanted them to take sort of a multidisciplinary look at identity. Why am I doing this wrong? Oh, I get it. Also discuss how both biological and environmental factors shape identity. A big theme in psychology has to do with nature and nurture and what types of factors are caused by biological, nature versus nurture. And I actually have this book, the Nature-Nurture Debate, Essential Readings, and I pulled some really interesting articles for them. A lot of the articles in here do focus on critical factors that we associate with identity, like personality, gender, psychological disorders, intelligence. So it was really applicable in terms of helping them understand identity from a variety of perspectives. And then describe and better understand one's own unique identity. In addition to looking at identity as a concept, this is an introductory course to psychology. I try to get students to relate to themselves and better understand themselves too. So it was also a personal sort of growth throughout the course as well. Okay, so basically, how did we get there? What things did we do in the classroom? We had some assigned readings, and then students would come in and we would interact and have discussions. I also held some in-class group activities. I also incorporated methodology, especially with psychology. The scientific method is so important. So I tried to incorporate various ways of gathering data and organizing data to synthesize and summarize and draw conclusions. So that was also part of the process. So the first three activities sort of gave the students sort of the prep work that they needed to be prepared to do the museum visit. So I'm just going to pass this around if somebody wants to take a look at it. I can show it to you also after class, but it kind of describes the exhibit and some of the artwork that's provided. And then at the very end, in groups, they created a PowerPoint presentation that kind of synthesized and integrated everything that we went over throughout the course in terms of identity, American identity, and their own personal reflection on their own personal identity. Okay. All right, so in order to introduce identity, I wanted the students to focus on identifying factors that influence personal identity. I also wanted to demonstrate how psychologists use research to better understand complex human behavior. So in this part, I had pulled some articles on what is American identity, what identity is in terms of personal versus social identity. We looked at an article on sex reassignment and birth and how that affects gender identity, and that was sort of reflected both biological and environmental effects of how gender identity develops. We also focused on, in this particular section, we focused on sort of looking at what are some of the biological factors and how genes influence, how DNA influences who we are versus just environment. Typically when I ask my students, well, how do you think your identity is shaped, or where do you get a sense of yourself, or what is, where does our personality come from? Almost, I would say 90% of the students think that we are born as blank slates. Everybody is, we're all based on our environment, and so it was important to show them that it's not just the nurture, it's also nature. So I think they got a good appreciation of that through this activity, and I was able to also meet my goals, in contributing to the theme of identity. All right, so this is basically an introduction to identity. In the next section, the next work that we did, okay, so we did some identity work after we did some background discussion and reading about identity. In this segment, we identified some of the dimensions of personal identity. We discussed what identity means to each student. I described to them identity as a psychological concept, sort of a evolving sense of self, as well as a social concept in terms of group membership. So to elaborate on this concept, I had students work in groups and sort of identify what factors they felt affected their personal identity by answering the question, what roles do I play in life, and then what groups do I belong to in life? And so we came back together as a class to try to sort of identify the characteristics associated with group membership and also personal identity. Also worked on defining American identity and creating individual narratives on identity. So once we came together as a group and identified the various dimensions that we thought reflected both personal and social identity, I had the students break into pairs and interview each other to sort of generate their own personal narrative, so they were actually thinking about what identity means to them personally, and then I had them write up sort of their own personal reflection, their own personal narrative. As part of the museum experience, we talked about entrance narratives and how important entrance narratives are and how they can influence our identity and also our sense of self through the museum experience, and that the museum experience can actually help shape and change our personal identity. So I actually had them reflect on that at the very end too, how once they had a good idea of their own personal identity, then to reflect back and has anything changed as a result of this experience. And I'm having trouble with the thing again. So the activities that we did to sort of meet these goals, we did group work. I had them interview. I also, in terms of American identity, I created a little survey. I asked them questions. They had to respond on a 5-point scale. I consider myself an American from strongly agree to strongly disagree. I feel a personal connection to America. I feel a personal connection to another nationality. I am proud to be an American. And then I tabulated those results and brought them back, and then it gave us an opportunity to discuss some of the differences and similarities in how people actually feel about being an American. Also specific symbols that relate to being an American, and I showed how the comparisons. Some were very patriotic and traditional, and some were very unique. Somebody said something about a bottle of Jack Daniels, because there's something that's, I don't even know the quote, that's written on the Jack Daniels bottle that has something to do with being American. So we talked about how based on our experiences and our expectations and our perceptions, how it all affects how we define what it is to be an American, and that while we're unique, we have similarities, and also our experiences shape how we perceive identity as well as American identity. All right. So I'm hoping I can switch to the next slide. And I can't. All right. So, so this sort of set the stage for going to the museum. I selected the Portraiture Now Asian American Portraits of Encounter. The goal was to explore identity through a variety of modalities in terms of thinking, feeling, and doing, sort of a cognitive behavioral perspective. I can just, can I move this? And also to analyze the museum experience. So we visited the exhibit. I had students work in groups of 3 to participate. Should I scroll down? And basically we have already sort of defined identity, what its causes are, factors that influence it. And there are basically 3 types of identity.
Could you just tell us with words and we'll advance it.
Okay. Basically 3 types of identity make up who we are. We talk about physical identity, psychological identity, and social identity. So I had each student in a group pick one of those and find a portrait in the exhibit that they connected with, that they related to, and then how each of those types of identities were reflected either in the behaviors or the emotions, and that to communicate that with the other people in their group. So they were actually really focusing and thinking about the portraits that they connect with and what type of identity was being reflected and expressed in those portraits. In terms of analyzing their museum experience, I also, we talked about different types of experiences at a museum. Is it a social experience? Is it a cognitive experience? Is it introspective? So I wanted them to reflect on what they were actually getting out of the museum experience. So after they did that, I actually sat in the beautiful atrium at the National Portrait Gallery, and I intended to have one big group meeting, but everybody came at different times and got lost on the metro. And some of these students, some of the classes, some people, like Scott had, what, 4 students? I had 60. So I was there all weekend, 2 weekends, and it ended up being more like small focus groups that I held, which was great for them. It was good for me too, but I did a lot of talking. So I tried to process what they were thinking and feeling, what they were experiencing while they were at the museum, relating it to what they've learned in class, as well as what they got out personally out of the experience. And then in the final, so after that experience, the group project, basically I had them create a PowerPoint presentation in groups of 4. The goal was to sort of integrate all the information throughout the course to better understand American identity as well as personal identity, to further gain insight into their own personal identity, and also to evaluate attitude change or changes in terms of their values as a result of the museum experience. So they created a PowerPoint presentation and then also a personal reflection paper where they really needed to reflect back on have they changed as a person, or not as a person, or their view of who they are as a result of this experience. Has their personal narratives changed or helped shape them? So this is just one of the groups. I don't know, is this from the beginning, the first slide? Right, so each person was supposed to write their own sort of entrance narrative, personal narrative, and then select a painting from the exhibit that they related to and why. So this is Amina. She was born and raised in Pakistan. She's a full-time student. She doesn't work. She's an artist. She likes colors and puts them into every moment of her life, and she's a happy person. And you'll see with each of these that everybody has a completely different concept of what they, how they want to reflect their identity. So she identifies with this picture because who likes to paint and sees everything in an artistic way. So she observes everything and likes to express her feelings and emotions through her painting. All right, so the next slide. Luciana, she talks about, she identifies with this portrait, and I think this is just what his narrative was. Growing up, I felt as being a minority in general kind of sucked. I used to consider being different a burden, but over time I learned to embrace such things as agents of strengthening. I like kimchi with spaghetti. And so Luciana, she talks about where she was born. She was born in Brazil. She has favorite foods and music. She has adapted to this country very fast. She loves the American lifestyle. I can say I love this country as much as I love my own. So she talks a lot about her country and also feeling like a minority. She says, I've been here 8 years and my identity has changed a lot since I came, and I love all this change. Okay, so next. Jennifer selected this portrait. She has a picture of her and her brother when he's, I guess, 8 years her senior. She said, this part of me is captured, although I'm a mother of 2 beautiful boys now. The fun-loving 8-year-old girl who looks up to her older brother is still here today. I like to have a good time. I value his opinion more than anyone else. He has taught me to have pride in myself and always do my best for myself and my children. So she reflected on this and how she connected with, like the friends in this piece. I find my closeness with friends that has helped me to learn a lot about myself. My identity is ever changing, but my core group of friends is not. We accept one another for our pros and cons and support each other at all costs. Okay. And then they kind of described, I had them define what identity means to them. They feel identity is a collection of life experiences along with the people in your life and the roles you play, an evolving personal image. So I also asked them to talk about their own personal identity, define what they feel identity is, and then also American identity, which is should be on the next slide. Right, so we believe American identity has more than one meaning. For some, it may mean that you were born or raised or you have a certain luck. For others, you identify with other Americans by having freedom and equality, the freedom to choose your own path and have your own aspirations. We all agree that being an American means that if you work hard enough, you can reach your goals. Okay, next. I had them try to relate nature and nurture. This was, I would say, in terms of all the slides, this was the least, I think, understood. They basically define nature and nurture, and I wanted them to really apply how that relates to shaping identity. And I think they did so in some ways, but not as at a deep as level as I would have liked. So they define sort of nature, and nature theory takes things a step further to say more abstract traits such as intelligence, personality, aggression, and sexual orientation are also encoded in individuals' DNA. And they picked these characteristics because these are the things that we talked about that also affect who we are as people. Okay, and then nurture was the next slide. Our behavioral aspects originate only from the environmental factors of our upbringing. So they basically defined nature versus nurture, and I want them to take it a little bit further. So I can adapt that in this semester. And then what's the last? Oh, and then I wanted them to reflect on their exhibit. They say identity itself has many different definitions. American identity is shown in the individual portraits and narratives on how each individual felt and what they understood to be American. The freedom to make this works for art, some promiscuous or even risque, because some of the portraits were, I would say, yeah, they were a little risque. There was some nudity. Admirable to individuals and nations alike, that is what grows our own culture that others seek to be a part of. We believe American identity is the culmination of all cultures and traditions that we can choose to share in. And then I had them do, on the last slide, just a quote that they felt reflected, their experience. So, and the quotes were great, but some were long, some were short. We know what we are, but not what we may be. So, and that's how they ended it. I kind of probably wasted too much time. I can just glance. There's one more that I want to show you. I won't read it all, but just so you can see how they sort of differed and how different groups took different so the second one, yeah. So some are sort of longer than others. So the first one, the first slide. Oh, I can use this now? No. So you want to just click on the, do the slideshow from current slide, and then you can just scroll down pretty quickly from current slide. Then one over. Okay, so just scroll to the next one, please. So Richard talks about, this was sort of one of the exhibits, and they were all individual pictures, and this was sort of a summary. And he kind of talks about how he relates to that. And let's show the next one. We'll just go through this quickly. I really like what Weiss said here. So he said he chose this piece because it basically shows life, the different stages of it and what we go through, the twists and turns, the light and dark of all, show different everyday struggles that we face. The reason all the hair types were different is because everyone is unique in a way and no one goes through the same exact struggles as others. So I thought that was a pretty, insightful reflection. And so you can just scroll through some of the others, see how they relate and their own personal. And the next one, this was the risque. This is one of the risque ones that they were talking about. But Phaedra was she said, this, it shows how she fostered American culture as her own, is what attracts me most to this picture. The other item is the exercising ball, which is a symbol of staying in shape and in control. Okay, and then, so identity here, so obviously this is much longer, but they incorporate a lot in their concept of what they have learned, what they believe identity is. And then the next, then American identity, also about racial and social classes build the backbone of America's identity. And then the last one, we can just scroll through these. This nature, nurture, and then they talked about their exhibit, their sort of PowerPoint presentation, and then the reflection, that, and then their last quote: "Walls with windows and doors form the house, but the empty space within it is the essence of the house," and how they interpreted it. So, and that's it. Thank you.